Hello, everyone, and welcome to AP US History for Winners with your teacher, Mr. Johnson. Last time we talked about World War One, and today we are talking about the 1920s. We're talking about inventions, communication, technology, culture, and politics. A lot of stuff to go over, so if you are ready, let's begin. First, let's talk about the technology of the 1920s. It is important to note that new technology is going to shift the focus of the US economy to production of consumer goods and leisure time. I would make sure we understand this idea really well. So, we're going to see a shift towards consumerism and leisure goods, meaning people need to buy things, they need to consume. That's how the American economy is going to grow. And more people are going to have more free time. And so there's going to be new economy sectors opening up all about giving people stuff to do. So here are some examples. The radio becomes wildly popular in the 20s. It's a huge source of entertainment. You'll see people just gathered around the radio, families just listening to their favorite program, soap opera, comedy, whatever. The War of the Worlds is a very famous example in 1938, a little bit after this, but where they, scared everybody. They're telling a story about if the world got taken over by aliens, but they're putting it on the radio and people think it's real. So they take it as real, and it kind of freaks everybody out. But like I said, there's also soap operas, and in the 30s, we'll get into how FDR uses the radio for something called fireside chats, where he communicates his message to mass audiences. All right. Another piece of technology we need to know about in the 20s is the cinema. Movies, motion pictures start to become popular. There's this idea of a Nickelodeon. I'm sure you've heard of that TV channel, right? But a Nickelodeon starts out as a show where you can pay one nickel and you can get into and you can watch some entertainment. It's almost like a variety show, okay? Movies are going to entertain many people throughout the 20s and into the 1930s during the Great Depression. The Jazz Singer might be a good movie to know about. It's the first movie with sound, so they actually were able to combine the movie with the sound. Before, they would either have like a live orchestra that would play, or they were just silent films. And then the last piece of technology we need to be aware about for the 20s is the automobile. So this is going to be a mass-produced item, like a car, right? That's going to be popularized by Henry Ford, and it's going to allow for more personal mobility. It's going to allow for more vacations, and it's also going to allow for the growth of suburbs because now not everybody has to work in the city. But for the start of the 1920s and for most of the 1920s, urbanization is going to be the trend, even though we have cars, right? As we see pictured here on the right with this awesome colorized image of Chicago. Cars are very popular, right? Most American are going to live in cities in the 19 by 1920. So we see a huge shift, right? America starts out as a agricultural country in the late 1700s. That's Thomas Jefferson's vision for America, if you think all the way back, right? And now we are very much an urbanized factory country, okay? So some of the most popular cities in the 1920s, New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, Cleveland, and St. Louis were some of the biggest cities that were around. Okay. Now, what's good about the cities, as far as some different groups, is that they're going to provide new economic opportunities. For example, women and immigrants are going to have a better chance of getting jobs in cities like this. Okay. All right. Continuing on to immigration is going to be a big cultural trend or a big trend in the 1920s. However, the response to immigration is what we want to look at. Okay, so after World War One, nativism is going to increase. Now, we've talked about this concept of nativism before, and nativism is in general a fear of immigrants, okay? And so there are going to be new quotas that are going to be put in to restrict immigration. And they especially want to limit immigration from Southeast Europe and in Asia, and a lot of this has to do with the Red Scare, which we talked about before, the fear of communism. Some examples. I might know one of these. Okay, the first one's probably the easiest one to know about. The Emergency Quota Act of 1921. This restricts the number of immigrants from a country to 3% of the total people from that country living in the US in 1910. So I know that's a little confusing. So what that means is in 1921, they say, okay, well, you can only 3% of the people from 1910 from any given country can come in. So if there was 100 British people living in America in 1910, well, only 3 new British people can come in every year. Okay, and so what that does is it's keeps the diversity of America at the same levels because it's tied to this quota, it's tied to this ratio. Okay. And then in 1924, the National Origins Act of 1924, they cut that quota down to 2%. And they're going to even use an older census in 1890. So again, they're trying to keep America in this nativist mindset, keeping America for what they think America should be for, and not these new immigrants from Southeast Europe and from Asia. And these acts, these laws are going to put an end to unrestricted immigration. If you think back to the Chinese Exclusion Act from the late 1800s, these are similar in vein, but now we're even impacting more and more groups. So nativism is going to increase. Make sure we understand that idea of nativism. Okay, we'll see it pop up again. All right, switching gears towards the first Great Migration. Now, we talked about this briefly, so in another slide. So I just want to go over this quickly, but this happens during and after World War One. And again, this is where African Americans are leaving the South because of segregation, like Jim Crow laws, because of racial violence, like lynchings, and because of limited economic opportunities, like sharecropping is the main job that a lot of African Americans have in the South. So they're moving to the North, they're moving to the West, they're trying to find economic opportunities. They're still going to face discrimination, right? There's still going to be plenty of discrimination and racism in the North and West, but there are more economic opportunities in lower paying jobs still, though. So like janitors, dishwashers, things in that nature. And with all this migration, we have places that we would, people would think about in the North, right? As places that don't have a history of slavery that you think might have more equal opportunities. But because they didn't have the diversity, they hadn't really been faced with the challenges of diversity, and how people, if people are racist, how they might feel about an increasingly diverse country. And so what we're going to see is the Red Summer in 1919. And this is a series of race riots all over many northern cities. And again, this is a reaction between individuals in the North who are not used to this increased diversity when the Great Migration starts. Chicago is particularly famous for the race riot that happened in 1919, right? All right. So, due to the Great Migration, we're going to get a very important event called the Harlem Renaissance. We definitely want to be able to name this one. So, the Harlem Renaissance is a celebration of African American culture through writing, music, and art. And as a part of the Great Migration, right, a lot of African Americans are going to flock to areas, and they're going to congregate in areas, and they're going to spread their culture. And one famous example of this is in Harlem in New York City. Okay, and all three of these individuals and many more are part of this Harlem Renaissance again, where their culture becomes more and more appreciated as they all move to an area and they're able to spread their culture easier. So Langston Hughes, pictured in the top right, he's an African American author, very famous for a lot of his works, his plays. He's also a playwright. Zora Neale Hurston is another African American author, and pictured on the bottom right is Duke Ellington, a jazz musician. And so this is going to bring in a lot of also like the jazz age and the idea of young people going out to clubs, listening to jazz music, partying, right? If you think Great Gatsby style, okay? So with the Harlem Renaissance, we're going to get into ideas of cultural conflict. The 1920s is a big time of cultural conflict between people who are embracing new ideas and people who are holding on to older ideas. And we're going to break down some different examples here. Gender roles is a very famous one. So flappers are young women that are going to drink, dance, smoke. They're going to start to wear more, revealing clothes than what people were used to, as you see pictured here on the right. And so they're going to challenge a gender norm of a woman supposed to be someone who stays at home and is very conservative. Okay. We're going to see other people challenging gender norms like Margaret Sanger. She's going to advocate for birth control in America, which is, again, a new concept that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. And they're even going to start to propose something called the Equal Rights Amendment, where women want to have a constitutional amendment that says that they are equal to men in every way. And we'll talk more about this even in the 1960s when they try to bring this up again. It does not get passed, but it's an idea that women want in the Constitution, equal protection, and they want it laid out in the Constitution more than just the right to vote. They want it spelled out clearly. Modernism is another idea of cultural conflict, right? So what this means is like people who are adapting to the new technologies and the new ways of life and new ways of working are having conflict with the people who are slower to adapt, right? If we think about urbanization in the 1920s, like we said, more people are living in cities than not, okay? And a lot of workers are losing their autonomy, right? They're working in an assembly line. You're not really thinking about what you're doing every day. You just kind of go in, you clock in, you're working. And so this idea, a lot of people feel like it's Americans losing a lot of its cultural cultural ideas, its independence as an individual. Okay. And the last cultural conflict is definitely one of the more important ones. And I'm going to tell you an important story you should know about. It's about science versus religion. And you should definitely know the name of this trial, the John Scopes trial. Sometimes you hear it called the monkey trial, even. Okay. And so this is a trial all about the teaching of evolution in a Tennessee school. So a teacher, a biology teacher, tries to teach about evolution. And the school argues, well, no, you can't teach about evolution. You should be only teaching the idea that God created man. You shouldn't be teaching about evolution at all. And there's actually a whole court case. It becomes like a big media circus, and everyone's kind of paying attention to the results of the court case. They actually decide that the teacher shouldn't have been teaching evolution at all. He should be teaching religion. Okay, and this is gonna use a literal interpretation of the Bible versus evolution, right? And so they're going to emphasize the role of religion. But again, the fact that there are teachers willing to push this shows that science is creeping in and starting to, to some people's minds, erode the religious ideals of America at the time. So it's just another example of the cultural conflict in the new and the old. All right, so that is it for our notes on 1920s technology and culture and politics and kind of everything that goes along with it. Let's summarize because there's a lot here. Number one, describe the culture of the 1920s. Make sure you can be specific and give some examples. Number two, what were the causes and effects of the Harlem Renaissance? And number three, describe America's stance on immigration in the 1920s. Be specific and give an example. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.